Welcome to Europe Debates. I'm Richard Milsom, the Executive Director of the European Conservatives and Reformist Party in Brussels, and today Europe Debates discusses Uyghur rights. Over the last decade, the Chinese Communist Party has treated Uyghur people with increased suspicion and hostility. This has resulted in an unprecedented erosion of human rights, and today the Uyghur people are some of the most violently repressed people in the world. Nearly 2 million Uyghur people are currently illegally held in internment camps across the Xinjiang province. Because of the Chinese Communist Party, Uyghur people are not only being interred, but have had every other of their rights stripped from them. They cannot travel, marry, meet with neighbors, eat the foods they want, or attend their places of worship. They've been subjected to forced family separations and even rape. Basic human dignity has been denied of these people. And yet, many continue to turn a blind eye to it. The European Union itself has continued to insist that there is potential for trade between China and the Union, despite what is going on in Xinjiang. However, there is also a growing movement against China, with the United States, Australia, and the United Kingdom all taking tough stances against the regime in recent months. The fact, however, still remains that more needs to be done, both on a European level and a national level. And to discuss this, we have an excellent panel today to discuss this. Now, today's debate is live streamed across multiple platforms, including YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as the ECR Party website. And we're grateful to our many supporters and followers who watch these debates, and we encourage them to ask questions via the comment sections, which we will try to relay to the panel later on. So without further ado, let's get it started. And I would like to welcome Dolkan Issa. Dolkan is president of the World Uyghur Congress. He first rose to prominence when he organized student protests in 1988 over the unfair treatment of Uyghur people in China. He was expelled from the university and later forced to flee. In 1996, he established the World Uyghur Youth Congress in Germany, and in 2004 helped establish the World Uyghur Congress, of which he became president in 2017. So Dolkan, thank you very much for being with us today. And perhaps to get us started, and bear in mind we have a very, very broad audience watching today, what is the situation in Xinjiang and how long have these things been going on? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, and Professor Azam and other participants from the United States. Well, I would like to thank European Conservative and the Reformist Party for inviting me to this webinar. I greatly appreciate the Conservative Reformist Party campaign in the European Parliament to raise awareness of the Uyghur issue, Uyghur crisis, and urge European Union to take necessary action. As you say, indeed, the current situation of the Uyghur people has worsened dramatically over recent years. As a result of targeted campaign by the Chinese government, the Uyghur community has suffered incredibly, as their very existence has come under threat. In the last 4 years alone, Chinese government has arbitrarily detained millions of innocent Uyghurs in concentration camps, where they are subject to killing, torture, sexual abuse, forced labor. To be honest, it is very difficult to confirm exactly number, how many people are still in concentration camp, but we estimate at least 3 million Uyghur are suffering today. Middle of September this year, Chinese government first time give indirect number, saying it's from 2014. Each year, subject 1.3 million people subject to the education. It is meaning from 2014 to until now 6 years, we can calculate is 7.8 million. So how many still in the concentration camp? How many already transferred to the forced labor? How many is already killed in the camp? It is really unknown for us, but we estimate definitely at least 3 million people still in the concentration camp. Chinese government has also implemented a shame to repress Uyghur birth rate and the diminished Uyghur population through the mass sterilization and the forced abortion of the Uyghur women, amongst us birth prevention measures. Forced labor and modern slavery, hundreds of thousands of the Uyghurs. Attack Uyghur culture and religions, so bans Uyghur language and the destruction mosques and gratuitous. Australian Policy Institute report from 2017 until now, at least 8,000 mosques was completely destroyed and another 8,000 mosques partly destroyed. Separating Uyghur children from their parents who are detained in the camp, forcing them to denounce their ethnic identity, subjecting them to political indoctrination. German scholar Andreas Zen's report estimate 800,000 Uyghur children already separate from the family. Uyghurs have been suffering from series of atrocity and the situation continue to be deteriorated. Everything that is unique about Uyghur people is under attack, or language, culture, religion, history, and ethnic identity. Chinese government is fragmenting our society, imprisoning and disappearance, prominent Uyghurs, and cutting social ties between us. Even outside China, we are not safe. Chinese government constantly monitors, harass, and threatens Uyghur living abroad, even a European Union country as well. They are trying to force Uyghur to use spy on each other, deny Uyghurs new passport, essentially making them stateless, and relentlessly try to force host country to return to Uyghur refugees to China. Just 2 weeks ago, 3 Uyghurs forcibly deported from Indonesia to China. They disappeared and subject to grave abuses. And since 2017, all the Uyghurs who live in the European Union and around the world in the exile have lost contact to the family member. I personally also lost my contact with my family from middle of April 2017. Since more than 3.5 years, I have no contact with my family member. Just we got very heartbreaking news. First heartbreaking news after lost contact. After 1 year later, 2018, 12th of June, I got first heartbreaking news. My mother died in one of the concentration camps in China. She was 78 years old at that time. And the beginning of 2020, this year, January, I learned from the Chinese media my father died as well. But I don't know what condition, where is, and even I have no idea where he is and the cemetery is. While I greatly appreciate initiative at the European Union to address Uyghur crisis, its ultimate response has been far too weak. However, European Union now has opportunity to take meaningful steps to end Uyghur genocide. China is recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is fighting with countries like United States, Canada, Australia, as well as with other Asian countries. Europe, therefore, find itself meaningful position to redefine its relationship with China. It should make sure it does not conduct business as usual with a government that actively commenting genocide and export its repressive regime abroad, certain European citizens and the EU rule of law and democracy. Most importantly, European Union's concern must be translated into the real, meaningful action to hold China accountable for its action against the Uyghur. Raising the issue during the bilateral task has proved to be far from enough, as China has only intensified its repression against Uyghur. The ongoing discussion regarding EU-China comprehensive agreement on the investment present and a good opportunity for the EU to insist on strong human rights language, including human rights clause that makes any dual condition on China respecting its human rights obligation. As you know, Professor Ilham Tohti, last year, exactly 1 year before, 18 December 2019, he got Sakharov Prize in the European Parliament fight. But still, he is in the jail. Even since 1 year, we haven't got any news from him. So we haven't we have witnessed European Union not really strong, good enough action to save his life. Furthermore, European Union should introduce its own legislation to ensure that Chinese government action are not without consequences. European Union must follow United States by adopting its own global human rights sanction regime soon to ensure that those responsible for the Uyghur genocide not to go unpunished. Moreover, European Commission should soon introduce mandatory due diligence legislation so that European business are obligated to take necessary steps to stop benefiting from the Uyghur forced labor. Finally, European Union must adopt appropriately terminology referring to the Uyghur crisis for what is this a genocide. This would not only show that European acknowledge the urgency of the situation, but it is also willing to take proportional steps to put an end to it. The European Union must decide what it is and what it wants to represent. If it is serious about being a leading authority and to defend human rights worldwide, it cannot remain silent. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dolkan. It is a terrible situation. It is a genocide and should be recognized as such. There's many things in there that we'll come on to talk about, particularly about the international response. But thank you for those comments. And I know the work you do is incredibly brave and incredibly difficult, and you have our full support. So thank you. But let me now bring in Dr. Azim Ibrahim, who's a research professor at the Strategic Studies Institute in the US Army War College and a director of the Center for Global Policy in Washington, DC. So good morning to you, Doctor. Azim's written 2 books, The Rohingyas Inside Myanmar's Genocide and Radical Origins, Why We Are Losing the War Against Islamic Extremism. His research and advice has been well received across the political spectrum. So, Dr. Azim, thank you for being with us. I wonder if you could add your comments to Dolkan on how you view the situation, and perhaps bear in mind your background, how this compares to similar events in Asia and the Middle East.
Thank you so much, Richard, for having me, and thank you so much to the ECR for organising this very important event in this very timely fashion. Let me just start off by saying that, how did this whole situation start with the Uyghur persecution and the Uyghur mass incarceration? Now, many would like, particularly from the Chinese government, would like us to believe that this was a response of terrorist activity from the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang, hence why they wanted to take this action against the Uyghur minority. But the reality is that, and I think nobody across the political spectrum disputes the fact that if a country is a victim of terrorism, that they have every right at their disposal to pursue and prosecute those individuals that are responsible. But it's very interesting to see when this actually started. This can actually be traced back, and Professor Sean Roberts from George Washington University has done extensive work on this, when this actually started. And it actually started in 2014 when President Xi Jinping visited Xinjiang. And he's seen there a situation in which you had a minority group, an ethnic minority group living within the Chinese borders that was very different from the rest of the population. They had different language, they had different features, they had different culture, a different religion. And he believed that this was completely unacceptable and pursued a policy of signification. Now, President Xi is very different from other Chinese leaders in the past. First of all, he's one of the most powerful leaders to have ever taken this office, almost similar to Mao Zedong. He has given himself actually the same title as Chairman Mao, as the great leader. He has amended the constitution to make himself the president for life. And he is not a communist as much as he is a Han nationalist. And he is now engaged in a process of signification across the political spectrum, not just in Xinjiang, but also in other places like Tibet, that comes under the control of the Communist Party. And it's also very interesting to see that the person that he has tasked with de-educating the Uyghurs and removing what he calls the Islamic virus from the Uyghurs is the same individual that was tasked to do the same kind of job in Tibet, Shen Shuangguo, now the governor of Tibet, using the same oppressive policies. So this is a process of signification, a process of cultural genocide that's being pursued by President Xi Jinping in particular. It's very different. The other previous Chinese leaders did not engage in this kind of behavior because many of them believe, whether Jiang Zemin or Hu Jintao, always believe that China will they always believe that China will eventually become a superpower, that it is China's destiny to rule the world, and China will essentially become a great global power. President Xi has taken a very different approach. Rather than letting evolution take its course, as they all believe, he believes that China must assert itself on the global stage, hence why he is engaged in this kind of behavior, not just within China, but across the region. So this is, I believe, one of the principal reasons why this is happening, is that this is actually the ideology and the instigation of President Xi himself, that man at the top. This is his project, and he has to take ownership of it. The second thing I'd like to say, another principal reason why this is happening, is that the number one fear that China has is not that the United States may invade them, Hong Kong may become a separate territory, or anything of that nature. The number one fear of China is that the economy will slow down and they will not be able to create as many jobs as they are at the moment. And people will then start asking questions of the Communist Party. So what the Chinese government is doing in Xinjiang is essentially a very, very large test laboratory. They have essentially taken millions of people, over 10 million people, and put them in this very large laboratory in which they are trying to use the most sophisticated technology available at the moment, the most sophisticated surveillance technology, facial recognition technology, on all sorts, to try to monitor and control a very large population. And now that they have mastered this population, this technology, they're now outsourcing it to other countries and even expanding it to other minority groups within China. So everybody in China, in Xinjiang, for example, has to have these apps installed in their phone, which monitors every single one of their calls and monitors everywhere they go. And this is essentially a mechanism in terms of how do you control a massive population with the latest technology. And they have mastered this. They are exporting this to other countries. So you may not be concerned necessarily with what's happening in Xinjiang, but make no mistake, this is coming to your neighborhood very soon, this kind of technology. Countries, oppressive countries around the globe like Venezuela and the Philippines have already shown great interest in this technology. So I believe that's the second principal reason why this is happening, is that the Uyghur population is essentially lab rats for the Chinese Communist Party to control this huge population. And this is why, because the Communist Party certainly knows that their whole edifice is built in a house of sand, which is why they are completely intolerant of any criticism. You send one tweet, whether you're the coach of the Houston Rockets or the CEO of Cathay Pacific or anybody else of that nature, and they'll come down on you like a ton of bricks. And the reason why is because they know that any criticism could crack the whole edifice and bring the whole house down. Hence why they do not permit any sort of criticism whatsoever. And we see this today as well. Look at the situation in Australia. What did Australia do? They asked for an investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 virus. Very, very simple request, and the complete and utter sanctions against Australia because of this action, trying to devastate the Australian economy as a lesson to any other country not to step out of line. And the final thing I'd like to say in terms of your question, Richard, whether this constitutes a genocide or not, we are actually at the Centre for Global Policy producing a report which should be published next month. And this is produced by a coalition of over 50 of the top legal scholars from around the globe that have looked at the evidence and will come to a clear clinical determination whether the 1948 Genocide Convention has been breached or not. So certainly look out for that. But from my opinion, from the evidence that I've seen, and I am not a legal scholar, but from the evidence that I have seen, this clearly constitutes a case of genocide in terms of prohibiting groups from reproducing. The fact that Uyghur females are being forcibly sterilized in itself constitutes genocide. Genocide is not mass killing. You do not even need to kill one person for genocide to occur. It is essentially trying to eliminate a minority ethnic group. And in this case, I believe the Genocide Convention Article 2D has been clearly breached. But once again, like I said, we will be examining this from a purely legal and clinical perspective, and we will have a report on this very shortly. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Azim, for putting the situation so clearly. It is terrifying, isn't it? And of course, you know, the other thing to add is the campaign of misinformation and disinformation that's being spread across the rest of the world as well. And people are being sucked into this without realizing, you know, the severity and the impact of this situation. Perhaps Anna, you're at the front of things on this side of the thing. So if I could bring in Anna Fotyga, who's joining us from Poland today. She's the Secretary General of the ECR Party and longtime advocate for the rights of minorities in China, having herself stood up for communism, or stood up to communism in the past. Anna's had a number of roles over the years, including serving as Foreign Minister of Poland, Chair of the European Parliament's Security and Defence Committee, and recently as a member of NATO's Future Reflections Committee. So I think, Anna, you know, what can the international community do? You know, where is this coalition against China? You know, why aren't we doing more?
Thank you, Richard. I'd like to thank both distinguished speakers for describing the situation in China, in PRC, in Xinjiang province, and in particular what happens to Uyghur community, the minority based in particularly in this province. In contemporary times, we know that we face the rise of China, both externally with threats posed to Taiwan and to community of Hong Kong. We are here in the ECR Party engaged in those issues as well. But actually, I think that for quite some time already, we try to monitor the situation of Uyghurs and atrocities imposed by Xia regime against them. Rafał Lemkin, the author of definition of genocide, legal definition of genocide, was Polish citizen, and actually we are used to think about this term also in case of Uyghurs. I think that atrocities that we are aware of are first and foremost simply a shame for Europe when we keep silent about this. So I think that it is huge work still to be done within European Parliament and other institutions to expose even individual cases like Professor Ilham Tohti and others, but also to explain the nature of the process going on still in China. I think that the situation, atrocities, killings, imprisonment, over 1 million of people, the scale of violence fulfills definition, as both speakers told us, of genocide, and it is our obligation, because we have to know that in case of eventual genocide, we have the obligation to act. Surely people of public functions in international fora are obliged to not only to speak up, but also to take action. So I'm really worried by the level of debate about China when we try to speak about leveling interests and values and balancing both ways of approaching things. Responsible international partners should be very clear on this. So of course, China is a huge country with excellent history and possible partner for many of us. Yet, in particular, with my experience, my personal history as well, I know that even for let's say communist conditions, what we see in actions against Uyghurs is really appalling. It's appalling, requiring us to act. So my compliments once more, Richard, to you personally and your efforts for all campaigns. I still have excellent face mask. Yes, we produced this. It was due also to quality. It was used by many public figures during time of pandemics to raise awareness in the European Parliament and outside about the situation of Uyghurs. And we intend to continue this campaign for sure. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. And you're absolutely right. The campaign, but it needs to do so much more. I wanted to come back to Dr. Azim on this genocide issue and also the kind of the US response, seeing as you're at the heart of it there. As we understand it, the US Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act has recently passed, which is a sort of Magnitsky type, putting sanctions on various people. But I think it was sponsored by Senator Rubio. But I think that also had a genocide clause in it, which was rejected. But do you see the US response thus far as being enough? And also, I guess we should ask you, do you expect a change of policy or additional support from the new administration when they hand over next year?
Oh, thanks, Richard. I think on the issue of China and the Uyghurs, I think that there seems to be cross-party support. I don't think there's much difference in terms of the actual political parties here, Republican, Democrat. So I do not see there. I do not expect there to be much change. I do anticipate that the Biden administration will continue its policy of trying to pursue China and holding it to account for these policies. And I have to say that, we're all being very, very critical, people across the political spectrum of the Trump administration and some of his actions or inactions. But I think on this particular issue, they have been absolutely right. They're one of the only countries, along with the United Kingdom, I have to say, to call out China on this absolutely critical issue. And Europe, on the other hand, and I'm aware you're a European entity yourself, but has been extremely weak and has actually been extremely disappointing. And this is hugely unfortunate considering the history of Europe and considering the history of genocide in Europe. Countries in Europe are now looking to China for its post-COVID recovery. Particularly Germany, is where it exports over almost 50% of its cars, and hence they are unwilling and unable to call out China. And the fact that this situation has actually allowed to occur, and it is itself hugely disappointing. That fact that we have become so reliant on China for our economic well-being, and this is something that I think has to be examined. By not just the US administration, but I think the Europeans in particular, in terms of diversifying our supply chains. During this COVID crisis, we had this bizarre situation in which we were just totally reliant on China for almost all the equipment, PPE and ventilators and everything else. And this is not just bad economics, this is a national security vulnerability that has to be plugged. But in terms of your question precisely, I think the United States has taken the lead on this. I think the United Kingdom has taken a lead on this. Very surprising. Many people did not anticipate post-Brexit Britain to stand up for itself in such a fashion. But we have seen that Britain is now developing an ethical and moral foreign policy, much more aligned to global standards. Everybody expected the UK to kowtow to China and others to try to get a trade deal, but the UK has actually emerged much more benign, much more prestigious in this situation than any other country. So I think other countries have to see from this and certainly join the action.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. We're hoping to be joined a little bit later by a view from the UK, so we can do that. But perhaps in the interim, if I go back to Dolken, I'm interested to know what the World Uyghur Congress is able to do, particularly in these COVID times, in terms of its activity and pushing the message and lobbying governments and putting pressure on them, but also tangible things that we as European politicians need to listen to and start lobbying for in a stronger way here in our patch.
Yes, thank you. Yes, as you said, the World Uyghur Congress, we are use our capacity, raise this awareness to United Nations, particularly UN Human Rights Council and European Parliament and the European Council and the different of country, particularly democratic countries, government and the parliament. Actually this atrocity was not new. Most of them people just thought this is just starting 2016 or 2017 because most of the people in the past never aware of this, don't know this case, but actually it is not new case. This issue is the Chinese government discrimination policy and assimilation policy towards Uyghurs in Tibet has a long history. This East Turkestan, we call East Turkestan in China as Xinjiang, is occupied since 1949. Since the occupation, this atrocity was happening. I can give you only one example. Since 1949, Chinese government's policy towards Uyghurs assimilation never changed. One example is population transfer. 1949, and the whole Chinese population is Turkestan just 4-5%. Uyghurs 85%. But since then, until now, never stops the population transport and for us family planning policy. So today's official numbers, Chinese population is area 42%. Uyghur around the 43-44%. It is mean Chinese government main purpose is Uyghurs being minorities in own country, own land, then and slowly eradicate. But Xi Jinping talks about 2014. Chinese government avoid from the assimilation policy and really implemented genocidal policy today. We can see it because China. Why is the most of some people asking why no? It's not no. It's since the beginning. But 2018, first time United Nations Committee Racial Discrimination Committee reviews the Chinese report. Then and the US expert first time mentioned more than 1 million people in the concentration camp. This is a turning point. 2018 until 2018 August. World Uyghur Congress we are doing lobbying to the United Nations, European Parliament, different country. Really, we couldn't get any attention. Then after the UN really mentions this, and it is the issue now. It is the it is so many international media attention, so many countries really and involved in this case. Then in 2018 November, UPR Universal Periodic Review on Chinese reports. That time, first time. 14 countries in the rights issue asks the Chinese government to close down the concentration camp. But China is denied every time, every time. At the beginning, until 2018 November, China denied everything. No exists such a camp, some detention center. But after growing up international pressure, then China is accepted. It is vocational training center. It is not detention center or concentration camp. But so many professors, so many, for example, Ilham Tohti. Ilham Tohti he's a long life sentence. He got huge international prize, Sakharov Prize, but he's just separatist for the lifelong sentence. Professor of the Xinjiang University, Tashbulut Tib, who is the well-known professor, scholar, not only among the Uyghur, whole China. He's sentenced to death, And the professor and the president of the Xinjiang Medical University, Halmat Hopur, he is a concentration camp. There are no need to eradicate it. And so many football player, singer, and so many intellectuals in concentration camps. There are no need to eradicate it or vocational training because they are really educated people. Then Chinese government couldn't hire this and then change narrative. We're fighting terrorism and radicalism. So then, and it is also, it is no reason more than 1 million or 2 or 3 million people. Okay, you can fight them to terrorism or radicalism, but it is not reason. This is not excuse. You can locate it up more than 3 million people. Then China, end of 2019, saying they are already graduate from the school. No, it is they have a happy life. What does it mean? Then 2019, but it's the ASPI, Australian National Strategy Institute, saying 2019, Chinese government extended this new builds come more than 380 come new build between 2019 until now, within 1 year. So this is this things was going on, but still European country, most of them European countries still silence. We understand because China trying to undermine, split the European country. Today is 27 European Union countries. They are not coming same voice. Even we have seen Chinese government trying to split the European countries. Even some European Union member state also blocked EU statement in the UN Human Rights Council. We have seen it was happening once, 2016 or 2015. Greece did once Hungary did once, but. However, some European countries like Germany, French, and some UK is not anymore, but some European country raises issue. They have China and European Union human rights dialogue, German-China human rights dialogue was happening, but this kind of dialogue was happening, but we cannot see any result. Situation getting back. Not only situation for the Uyghur, whole general human rights situation in China, for so many Chinese human rights defender, so many human rights lawyer is detained today, and not only persecuted to the Uyghur Muslim, Chinese Christian, and the Tibet Buddhist, Uyghur Muslim, all is targeted today. So it is a time European country. Okay, we know European. We are very happy. European Parliament passed a resolution 2019, 2018 for the concentration camp and the general situation, human rights situation in China. But just talking, just concerning the issue, bring nothing. It is a time really take concrete action. We appreciate U.S. administration. We have seen some visible action for high-level Chinese Communist Party members. Xinjiang, who is the secretary Chinese Communist Party in Xinjiang Autonomous Region, and the sanction against him, and also 50 Chinese company puts the blacklist U.S. administration. But so far we haven't seen any visible action from the European Union, European country. Today, so many European company continue to make business with China. Professor Azmi already saying surveillance technology. This technology provides European country to the China, and today China testing this voice recognition camera, face recognition camera, testing Uzbekistan, then use other part of China, then it uses Hong Kong. Then now it is more than 20 countries, even some European country imports this technology from China to monitoring own people, and this is meaning now is China not impose only technology. China now is impose export. It is authoritarian regime to the other country. So that's why European country now it is the time really just because never again has happened again. European people have a very bad experience from the Second World War. 6 million Jewish people is died. That time is a war time, but no, it's not war time. No, it's everything is very clear. Everything is very clear. Satellite image and so many experts already published report. So many countries published report. So that's why it is the time European countries should be wake up. Is already and that it's a business. It should not be as usual. Stop the business. Then only this way can stop this atrocity.
Well, thank you, Dorkan. I mean, it puts us to shame, really. I mean, one of the, unfortunate things is that during this COVID times, countries have become incredibly domestic focused. And whilst that has happened, the EU's response to, the burning issues and the difficult problems of the world have been incredibly weak. And they should be doing far more on, helping those that are illegally imprisoned, suffering torture and persecution. I mean, you yourself suffered under an international arrest warrant as well. But perhaps I could bring Anna back in. And, what should it be doing and what can it do?
Well, I think that Europeans, because it is broader than the European unions, try to stay true to values, to values in case of European Union of founding fathers. Usually, we speak about values while engaging in trade, in economic relationship, in finances, with smaller and weaker, in my opinion. Unfortunately, we are less outspoken in case of atrocities imposed by powers, or rising powers or existing powers. And here we have certain problems. In negotiations with China, we do have human rights dialogue, I mean the European Union with China, but somehow it is separate. So we speak about human rights in China. There are atrocities and were portrayed for years. And yet it seems there are two routes we pursue. One route is human rights, and it is rather speaking about in a very mild tone, I would say, in comparison to level and scale of atrocities. And second route is business, trade, relationship, and surely opportunities and chances we see in this. We have to keep true to those values. At least we have to keep a single standard in our approach. So to apply same approach to African states when we discuss human rights, and to big powers when we see huge atrocities. That's very simple.
And Anna, do you think a sort of Magnitsky, sanctions type route is the way to go, or should there be further action than that?
I strongly believe in Magnitsky Act and Magnitsky sanctions, although I must say I would prefer it staying, me personally, it's staying on strong cooperation of member states having certain authority within member states to impose sanctions, but strong coordination is needed. Actually, I very much support the notion of Magnitsky Act. I supported it in case of Russia. I want all member states, including my own country, to go for this, and I would like it to us to impose equal standards to all of us. Just adoption of act is not enough. I think that political will to really treat all our partners in trade on equal footing is necessary, and that is, I still some work to be done on this. To bring example about Belarus, in 2016 we had agreed over 160 individual targeted sanctions against people imposing atrocities against opposition. Now it is much less, with extremely, I would say, atrocious way the Lukashenko regime acts against people. I'm afraid that what we need is simply coming back really to values, not to use them for political constraints. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anna, and well said. I was going to ask Dr. Azim, the world is a stronger place when you have strong American foreign policy, strong and effective American policy. And whilst the outgoing administration has been very tough on China, albeit in a slightly disorganized fashion, do you sense there have been longer term shifts in attitudes towards China in the US? And how might that impact assistance that they will be offered to Uyghurs and human rights violations or victims of human rights violations in China in the future?
I think globally, Richard, there has been now we can see a shift globally in terms of our attitude and understanding of China and what it stands for. China's introduction onto the world financial markets, probably one of the most significant events of the last century, or the last 100 years. The fact that China was able to engage in providing loans and investment infrastructure throughout countries, developing countries. Most of these countries that other institutions would not touch with a barge pole. But I think countries are now waking up to the fact that this is economic colonization, debt book, what they call debt book diplomacy, and in all but name, we have a situation in which we have multiple case studies now, in which countries have opened their borders to China, opened their infrastructure investment to China, are now essentially Chinese satellite states. And there was a very important study done by the Kiel Institute in Germany, which calculated how much loans China has given throughout the globe to countries, including developed countries. And originally we thought this amount would be about $200 to $300 billion, but what the Kiel Institute determined was that it was actually up to $1.5 trillion, making China the largest creditor in the world. Now you compare that to the Marshall Plan after World War II, which was $100 billion. So on a completely different scale. But now we have a situation in which countries are beginning to realize that this money comes with huge strings attached. We have the very famous case of Sri Lanka, where President Rajapaksa wanted to build a port. When he went to the World Bank, he went to the United States, he went to India, and they all told him this will be a dud project. He went to China, they handed him over billions of dollars in cash. He built the port, the Hambantota port. He could not keep up the payments. So China essentially renegotiated the terms of the agreement and took over the port. It is now part of the Chinese, what they call the peril of string strategy throughout Southeast Asia. It's essentially a Chinese base. Exactly the same thing in Pakistan, a country that nobody wanted to touch. China came in, invested $62 billion to the China-Pakistan economic corridor. It built the Gwadar port, the deep sea port in Pakistan. And essentially, it's now become a Chinese satellite state. Pakistan and other countries simply cannot speak out with China. And so this is a condition that that is attached to the loans and investment you get from China, is that China has absolutely no room whatsoever for dissent. If you are reliant on China, even a fraction, you have to be fully on board with the China project. You have to fully support whatever Beijing says. And we've seen this, in the Uyghur situation a few years ago. We've seen that a number of countries, 22 countries, signed a letter condemning China for its incarceration of the Uyghurs. Almost all 22 countries were Western countries. This was followed up by another letter by 37 countries, many of them Muslim countries, that supported China's record on human rights. So once you are reliant on China, this is the kind of things that China expects. They need ostentatious displays of public fawning on China on a regular kind of basis. So there is no escape once you're relying on China. And I think countries are now beginning to wake up to this. Countries like Malaysia and others have now refused Chinese investment. So I think we need to become aware of this. And the US and the European Union in particular need to understand that if we want to be players on this global stage, we need to invest in these countries as well. The World Bank and the European Union, etc., need to step up to the plate. Otherwise, China is the only option out there. One final point I would say about the Magnitsky Act. This is something that the United States and the UK, in the case of Russia, has now led the way. It is now for Europe to follow suit. And we've seen recently the comments by Carrie Lam from Hong Kong, in which she said she's paid in cash. You know, she's paid in cash and she has loads of cash in the house because she cannot use the banking system. This actually is indicative that the Magnitsky situation actually works. The Magnitsky Act actually works. And a Chinese dissident once told me that the #1 ambition of any Chinese leaders throughout the whole of the Communist Party, the #1 ambition that they have is to send their child, you know, to send him or her to Harvard, to send them to an Ivy League school. Now, if you have these Magnitsky Act targeting those individuals, this is something that they're unable to do. They simply cannot pay the fees of these schools in the West. So it does target them personally, and that kind of pressure does work. US has led the way, UK has led the way. It's now for Europe now to follow.
Absolutely, thank you very much. But you know, one of the other fears in this is, as you know, the portfolio of Chinese investments around the world grows, you know, when pressure is brought to bear on them, they will start to defend it as well, and it's something that we must be very aware of. And you're right, we must be investing in these places as well, you know, we must make sure that we don't lose the initiative here. We've got time just for a final round of comments. I'm going to finish with Dolkan, but Azim, is there anything else you wanted to add, or shall I go to Anna?
No, I think the only point I would make, the final point, is that I think Anna was absolutely right. This is not necessarily about China. China is a great civilization, probably one of the greatest civilizations in history, in human history. You know, the Chinese people are amongst the most entrepreneurial, most innovative people in history. This is about Xi Jinping and the Communist Party that he leads. You know, we did not have the same situation with previous Communist Party leaders. This is specifically about them. You know, we want to see a successful China that we can partner with. A successful China means a successful globe in terms of, particularly when we see how fast China is growing. But this is about Xi Jinping, and this is about the Communist Party that he leads, not about China or the Chinese people.
Super, thank you very much. Anna, same question, final comments.
I absolutely echo this statement. I think that basing on my experience, my own experience, by exposing atrocities of Xi Jinping regime in Xinjiang province and the Chinese Communist Party, we serve Chinese people best. Actually, because I'm absolutely sure we still remember excellent artists, writers, scholars, not only Uyghurs, people of simply Chinese nationality, and they also used to protest against this government and facing enormous violence, because authoritarian regime is really awful in its actions against its own society, not only externally. So we have to support them.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, the international community must act. You know, there are plenty of hotspots around the world where there are these types of violations, but this particular one is so serious and so severe. It requires, you know, urgent action. So let me turn to Dolkan now, just to end this debate. What would you like to add some final comments there, and final indications of how we can help, because we are friends and we do want to help and support in ways that we can. Final things that we can do to help you and the Uyghur community.
Thank you. Your party, European Conservative Reform Parties, you did very amazing job last 2 months of this. You start very amazing campaign like mask. You know, it is also because no, it is a time to everyone do something. And Europe today, China is not only it's threatened for just for Uyghurs. This point, every country, particularly European country, must understand. Yes, now we will lost everything. Yes, some genocide was happening, but what's happening in Hong Kong? We all have seen, witnessed, you know, and Hong Kong is democracy over. Hong Kong's autonomy is over already. Everything is happening. Yesterday this atrocity was start for Uyghur in Turkestan. Today we have seen what is going on in Hong Kong. Tomorrow is Taiwan. Today is Taiwan. Sovereignty is under dangerous, threatened by the Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party. So China never stop. So now it is the time. Whole world, particularly United States and European and Western democracy, should be set up the coalition. Then it is the time to stop China's CCP action. Other way, China has no limitation, because Professor Azimi already saying Belt One Road initiative. This is the Chinese one of the most important project. I strongly believe that it is the territorial expanding project actually. This China today has a problem, territorial problem, all neighboring countries. Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, India, and Japan, Philippines, Thailand, all the countries have a territorial problem. Today, 21st century, you cannot occupy one country with the military arm, but China used its economic power, trying to monopolize it, trying to occupy all the people. If today is China is getting the second big power, if we continue waiting up to 20 years later or 15 years later, if China being the first big economy, first power around the world, then we have to think on it. What kind of, because today's global Chinese CCP threaten global democracy, global human rights, and it is a dangerous. Now we have seen some sign of this. For example, I'm German citizen, I'm the European citizen, but I'm not really feeling I'm safe in this country, the European Union, because Chinese long arm getting everywhere. 2017, just 2 years before, when I came to the Rome, Italy is one of the center of the democracy, freedom, and the human rights. But I was detained in Rome. One of the Italian senator company invited me to the room for the joint press conference, Italian Senate building. Just 20 minutes start for the conference. More than 20 Italian police detained me. No, despite I'm a European citizen. So China is never stopped. If it is a time, and the European country should be united, and the European Parliament should have a strong responsibility for this, and Magnitsky Act must be implemented as soon as possible. It is very significant, and all the European company, particularly which has a direct related to forced labor, should be stopped as a business. Other ways, and one side is a country saying, just very mention softly human rights, then other side continue make business, and it is not way to stop China. So it is a time to stop business with China and take some concrete action, possible sanction to the Chinese Communist Party leaders. Other way, just only the US, only one US doing this, rest of some world continue make business China as usual, and it is not a good solution. So we are strongly believe, I hope, and know it's slowly some European country really realize how dangerous CCP regime. I hope it should not be silenced more. It is a time to take action. Yeah.
Well, Dolkan, thank you very much for that. You have our support, and we will continue to support and to work on this cause with you. And I look forward to us being able to do more together in the future to highlight this issue and keep it in the front of people's minds, and particularly in front of policymakers and lawmakers here, so that we can get some real tangible action to help the situation. I'm afraid we've run out of time, so I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panel members for joining us today. It's been, a really interesting debate. I know we could talk for hours and hours, but time doesn't allow. So thank you, and this is just a start. There'll be more to come. This whole discussion is recorded and it will be posted on our website afterwards, should you wish to re-review it or see any of the comments. And I would encourage our viewers to join us for future Europe Debates webinars, details of which will be posted on our social media. So just lastly, one big thank you to all of you on the panel today. Thank you for all of our viewers. I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon. Stay safe, and we'll see you again on the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.